Hello, everyone. My name is Faith, and I am currently the Hoarding Pathway Coordinator in the housing. I'm sitting under the Resident Services team, and this is a session regarding hoarding and self-neglect. Okay. So I'll start off with the general definitions of hoarding. So the first one is hoarding is the excessive collection and retention of any material to the point that the living space is sufficiently cluttered to prelude activities for what they are designed for. Hoarding disorder is a persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. A person with a hoarding disorder experiences distress at the thought of getting rid of the items. Hoarding is now considered a standalone mental health problem. Hoarding is distinct from the act of collecting and is also different from people whose property is cluttered or messy. It is not simply a lifestyle choice. So looking at the distinction, so we're looking at hoarding, collecting, and messy or cluttering. So if we start off with the hoarding aspect, so it's a recognized mental health disorder. So as part of that, there's a strong emotional attachment to the objects that are sometimes well within the excess of their value. It does not have any age restriction, so anyone can be a hoarder. Often there's a trauma or triggers resulting in the hoarding. So if we look at the distinctions, looking at the collecting aspect. So this is when someone has a compelling desire to collect a particular object. Looking at it as in, they're repeating, buying the same object over and over and over. So it often collectors neglect their aspects of their lives, other aspects of their lives, sorry. And then we look at the messy cluttering. So this can sometimes work in conjunction with the Care Act, where it says, somebody is struggling to manage and maintain a habitable home. So neglects to clean or tidy their home environment. Neglect may be due to medical conditions or just does not see the point of cleaning up or tidying up. Anything can be hoarded. So people can hoard clothes, newspapers, bills, receipts, letters, food and or food containers. So looking at, takeaway boxes or takeaway containers, collectibles such as toys, DVDs or CDs. Animals can be hoarded, and just to make you aware that obviously this is not an exhaustive list. There's quite a lot of items or things that people can hoard. So the general characteristics of hoarding. So looking at the individual in person. So there's that fear and anxiety. It's a long-term behavior pattern, excessive attachment to possessions, indecisiveness standards, socially isolated, large number of pets, mentally competent, extreme clutter, churning, self-care, and poor insight. So this is just the general characteristics looking at the hoarding person who has been identified as having hoarding behaviors. The clutter image rating, which is a nationwide used rating scale to identify and to distinguish the levels of hoarding. So if you look at level 1, where it's I've put on there as green, and the rating is really 1 to 3. So the household environment is considered standard. No specialist assistance is required. If resident feels they need more support, then appropriate referrals can be made. So we're looking at if it's at level 1 to 3. So if you go on to the level 2, which is ratings 4 to 6. So the household environment requires professional assistance to resolve the clutter and the maintenance issues in the property. And then obviously moving on to, clutter image rating 7 to 9, which is considered as level 3, and it's red. So household environment requires intervention with a collaborative multi-agency approach. This level constitutes a safeguarding alert due to the risks to the health of the household, surrounding properties, and other neighbors or other residents. So having looked at that clutter image rating, these are what, is best to be considered or could be explored. So you could explore a referral to the London Fire Brigade and they are able to complete risk assessments. I am aware that now in Havering we do have at the moment a London Fire Brigade specialist hoarding team that support people that have been identified as having hoarding behaviours. So you can also refer for any appropriate telecare equipment. So for instance, if somebody's a hoarder and there's quite a lot of trip hazards within the property, that sort of like means they are at risk of fall. So it's about making them aware, especially if they live alone. Is it appropriate to advise them to get a pendant alarm in the event of a fall? Would they be able to access them, to evacuate in the event of a fire? If they had a fall, going back to if they had a fall, would they be able to reach to the telephone, or are they able to get up on their own? Do they need some assistance? So things like a pendant alarm would be something that you would maybe advise them to consider getting or purchasing. A referral to Peabody. So Peabody is a voluntary organization, and it provides support with referring to different agencies like Tapestry, Age UK. So where animals are concerned, referral for the welfare of the animals, you can do a referral to the RSPCA. So referral to adult social care as well would be quite important to consider. If somebody is maybe in need, or they need to be assessed under the Care Act 2014 to see if they've got any needs, and subsequently any support or services may be provided. Refer to the GP. I suppose looking at this one, if somebody's unwell physically, consider doing a referral to the GP. We've got a referral to the mental health services, so that obviously speaks for itself. If somebody, obviously, looking at the beginning where we said hoarding has been identified as a mental health condition in itself. So therefore, a referral to the mental health services may be appropriate, depending obviously on the levels and whether that person is consenting to that referral. So I suppose in all of this, we always have to make sure that it's important to get that consent, to make the person aware that this is what you would like to do, or make them aware that this is something that they can or will benefit from. And then obviously in Havering, we've got the local area coordination team. So they can also support, in as much as they cannot support with the hoarding aspect. It's something maybe where, they can support with referring to different agencies, connecting, residents with different services within the community. Now, obviously, just to emphasize as well with the local area coordinators, it's quite important to understand that they are more of a helping hand. They support along, they help with, as long as somebody is willing to get that support. So they won't necessarily help with the hoarding aspect, but they can refer to different agencies, particularly if somebody is not known to social services or any other governing bodies. And then obviously there's the other two, which is the domestic violence and the alcohol dependencies charities. So those speak for themselves. It's just a matter of just getting in contact with the appropriate teams. So these are a few risks of hoarding. Risk can be identified as a risk to the resident, risk to the neighbours, risk to their visitors attending the property, professional or personal relationships, looking at the trip hazards and all of that. And then there's an increased risk of fire depending on what is being hoarded. So I need to emphasize that as well, that it depends on what is being hoarded. There's some items that somebody can, a resident can hoard that may not necessarily trigger a fire. So I suppose it's just going back to, everyone having to go to the fire safety training that's available online. And then there's a risk of personal injury from stored or hoarded items, environmental health issues. So where there's insects like bed bugs or rodent infestations. So sometimes if somebody is a hoarder, obviously that, especially if they're hoarding like food items or containers, empty takeaway containers, that attracts rodents, that attracts insects, and it sometimes, in worst circumstances, it can attract foxes as well. So we've got the London Fire Brigade. So what it says here, what I mentioned earlier, is that is if the fire is the accumulation of combustible materials such as newspapers, clothing, or rubbish. So obviously the information is right there on how to make a referral to the London Fire Brigade. And then obviously you can always give the tenant the London Fire Brigade leaflet. So looking at the referrals and the risks continued. So hoarding increases the risk of a fire occurring and makes it more difficult for people living within the property to evacuate safely. Fire can also spread to neighboring properties if the level of hoarding is severe or if flammable items such as gas containers are being stored. It also poses a high risk to firefighters when attending the scene. So obviously in this, if you look at it, if somebody's a hoarder and they've covered their windows, so in the unlikely event of a fire and the fire brigades is not able to access the property via the main entrance or the back entrance, if there is one, the next best thing would be the window. And obviously if they can't get through the window, if they smash the window, they can't get through it, or they can, but it's difficult to actually go into the property. That not only poses a risk to the tenant, but it also poses a risk to the brigades as well, because there's trip hazards there already. So it's just being mindful of leaving any fire escape routes clear. So looking at the next point, the sharing of information is extremely important for operational firefighter crew safety. London Fire Brigade is required to be compliant with Fire Services Act 2014 to make arrangements for obtaining information needed for the purposes of extinguishing fires and protecting life and property in that area. So I think that, goes along with what I was just mentioning, the example I was just mentioning earlier, about making sure that the fire exit routes are clear at all times. Then obviously there's the multi-agency approach to sharing information about hoarding, enables compliance with the Act and also strengthens the operational risk assessments when dealing with incidents and fires where hoarding is present. So looking at the mental health, I'm not going to touch much on it. It's just, just the basics, that a person's hoarding should not lead to the assumption that they lack capacity. So basically what that means is that just because somebody is exhibiting hoarding behaviors does not mean that they lack capacity to make informed decisions. Because capacity should always be assumed. We always have to assume that somebody has got capacity unless there is legal evidence. Legal evidence means, in this case, maybe referring to the social services or relevant departments or relevant professionals to complete a full mental capacity assessment, which will therefore mean, unless there's legal evidence to prove otherwise, you always have to assume that somebody has got the capacity. And then obviously in the instance where there's no capacity, then obviously the relevant professionals should lead on this complete full mental capacity assessment. And I've named a few professionals that are able to complete such an assessment. So looking at the hoarding and the housing legislation. So as hoarding is considered an antisocial behavior issue, any legal action taken by landlords will be governed by the Antisocial Behavior, Crime and Policing Act 2014. Whilst it may seem extreme to class hoarding as a form of antisocial behavior, Section 2 of this Act provides that any conduct capable of causing housing-related nuisance or annoyance to any person amounts to antisocial behavior, as hoarding results in the accumulation of large volumes of clutter, which can in turn make cleaning very difficult, leading to unhygienic conditions and encouraging rodent and insect infestations. This would clearly fall within the definition of a housing-related nuisance or annoyance. So this is continued as well. So the hoarding of combustible materials such as newspapers, magazines, and books increases the risk of a fire, and the clutter itself can block the route of an escape in the event of a fire. If clutter is kept in large piles, then it can collapse onto those in the property or prevent tradesmen who are instructed to carry out essential repairs from carrying out the task at hand. When local authority landlords pursue possession action in connection with hoarding situations, reliance is often placed upon grounds 2 or 3 of the Housing Act 1985, which respectively relate to the tenant causing a nuisance, annoyance, or annoyance to people in the locality and the condition of the property deteriorating. So that's the end of the slide. Thank you.